So, welcome to Beyond the Things Written. And today we talk about my journey out of the mental enslavery of the Watchtower. I likened it to a spell being broken. I won't go into the details due to a variety of reasons. One, I'm still processing a lot of this stuff, even though it's been many years. I've only been recently been in therapy, and this week I've got a new person I've got to, do the whole spiel with. And so we left off when I was about 10 years old. One of the most significant moments when I talked about motivation, reading the Sermon on the Mount, and feeling this revelation, this unveiling that, wow, that's what God really wants. He wants this pure motivation, and that we do things right and wrong, not because it says thou shalt not do, but because it's a qualitative part of our being, our character. So from that moment, as I was 10 years old, we moved from that downtown congregation in Toronto. 10 to 16, 17 was much the same. Fear, obligation, guilt, the characteristics of a cult, massive depression, suicidal tendencies. Of course, at that time, it was mild compared to what it would become. But I was extremely depressed. And I can't imagine any Jehovah's Witness gets through that without significant feelings of guilt, unworthiness. And that's the feeling of being a Jehovah's Witness. You never feel saved. You never feel you do enough. There is never enough that you can do. And you're constantly presented with ideals. This person is 90 years old. They got 25 Bible studies. And, this person's 6 and they're giving public talks, And they're always giving you these examples of who you should be like. It's one of those strange things that cults do often, presenting this example for you that you can never really be reached, but you're seeing this person. And I never forget how many times you would see these fantastic examples of, I pioneered since I was, 11 years old. And then you find out they leave the Watchtower and you're like, wasn't that guy just pontificating last circuit assembly? And now he's, that happens quite often. That's the way the image is, though. Jehovah's Witnesses are very image conscious in the way they present themselves. And on the platform, they want to create the culture that they do. And they do a very good job of it. Lots of cults do it that way as well. It surprises me when I got to investigate Scientology, how much of it is so much like the Witnesses. Different music, but much the same techniques are used. The experiences of how this has helped them and how this does and that, and very much like a Jehovah's Witness, or how this full-time service has done this to them and fulfilled their life, or this avenue of service, very much like the cults do. But I never got into trouble. I was a good kid. I never caused my parents trouble. There was a lot of tension in home. Because my older brothers and sisters were getting into trouble and doing things, yes, in Jehovah's Witness world you're not supposed to do. Of course, they weren't bad kids at all. They're just doing what normal kids do, whatever they might be. But in a Jehovah's Witness world, it's just these things, call the elders over for just about anything. You whip out the Bible or some Watchtower. Oh, one time. One time, this is okay. I'll tell this little story. One time, I got caught. This is probably the only thing I ever got in trouble in my entire teenage world. I never got into Jehovah's Witness trouble. I got caught playing a video game. This one time at lunch, because I had to go home for lunch because you can't hang out with the kids. So I even had to walk all the way home for lunch. It was like 30 minutes. In those days, convenience stores always had video games. So I'm playing video game. It's Punch Out. And I'm playing the video game, and my peripherals, my stepdad comes in. And my heart just went, this is, of course, horror. You can't play video games in my house, at least. Some witnesses may have been allowed, but it was definitely discouraged, and he was not happy. Oh boy, and I was just the whole day I was sweating bullets waiting to come home. I came home and there was a stack of bone volumes I had to go through. I mean, not the whole bone volumes, but the parts with the video games. And they were about that high. And whatever one would have to do with video games, I had to go through them and, be corrected. That was probably the only time I ever got in trouble as a witness. Now, my brothers and sisters are getting in trouble left, right, and center. All the drama really was about them. And I think my brothers were kind of young, really, in hindsight, but they all seemed so old, They seemed so old at the time. And these things just took on such importance, these, you're not going to a meeting or not going to the memorial. These things are just, having a heart attack, What most people would think of as is just rather minor become major thing. A cuss word was said, whoa, these type of things. Jehovah's Witness can't say a cuss word. Let your baby die not having a blood transfusion. Which one's worse? A cuss word, of course. That's how Jehovah's Witnesses are not, as I always say, not moral at all. I do remember, though, a significant moment coming around the age of 15, 16, and we were at Circuit Assembly. In the depths of despair, that type of thing, as I was from most of my Jehovah's Witness life. And I'm sitting there, and I remember that we talked briefly about those experiences at the beginning of this. And they're effective. These things work. They know what they're doing. The cults know how to work it. This young sister, probably 1920, was of course going to be interviewed and tell her experience of full-time service as a pioneer. And I thought, wow, she seems happy. I'm sitting there going, well, I'm miserable. She's very happy. So how, in my Jehovah's Witness world then, how do you, in fact, I remember they said to her, are you happy? And she said, oh, sure, yes. You know how it is with Jehovah's Witness. Experiences, they're so over the top, right? Oh, yes, brother. So that was a significant moment. It's at that moment I said to myself, if I want to be happy, pioneer. If you want to be happy, pioneer. And I'm stuck in school. Yeah, I was one of those people. If you would have let me, I would have left school in a heartbeat. I was not interested in that type of study. This type of study I could do, but that type of study, why? I didn't really see why we're doing this. The end is coming in 3 months. I should be out there, I should be like Jeffrey Jackson getting my GED at 15 and pioneering. That's kind of, I wished I could have done that. I really was, scared. I thought the end comes and I haven't had my time to pioneer. I won't get in, or I won't have as good a chance to get in. And around this time now, too, I'm 15, 16. I'm not baptized. I'm doing the doors and I'm doing the talks, number 2 talk, 4 talk. That was always a big deal, right? Oh, it's your first number 4 talk. I've got so many stories about that stuff. And I like to share some of the funnier ones too, but we'll keep today brief on the highlights. It's like a highlight today. This is just the Bible highlights. This is like my testimony highlights. And we'll get into the pedanticness later. I decided, that's how to get happy, is to pioneer. Now, I'm not baptized, and I have to say, my parents didn't really pressure me to get baptized. They didn't need to. The culture of the Watchtower, the issue of baptism is constantly set before children. And briefly, what I see with Jehovah's Witnesses today, it's still the same. In fact, maybe even more so. But it was definitely there that when you're not baptized and you're 14, 15, and you go to those circuit assemblies and district conventions, and especially at those ones, that I find that they always really nailed it. Now baptism, of course, is like signing the billion-year contract in Scientology. You're no longer viewed the same way. It's like your bar mitzvah. For a Jewish person, you are a man or a woman in your bat mitzvah. In Jehovah's Witnesses, once you're baptized, it's like your relationship with everyone changes, particularly your parents and your friends. Meaning, If you no longer have those beliefs, not change your lifestyle, that could be, but I'm talking just the beliefs. Like for myself, it's the beliefs that change, not anything else. You will now be shunned. Now, nothing in the Bible says, but not baptism is efficacious, not in the biblical sense, but in the cultural sense, that you are now viewed as like your bar mitzvah. You have different responsibilities now and consequences. There's no real benefits to being baptized, to be honest. I mean, you get to pioneer now, I guess. There's the you just know unbaptized pioneer. So now you get to pioneer. So how I got baptized, though, is kind of an interesting story because it gets into the mindset. And again, while I'm talking to you about motivation, like that epiphany when I was 10 years old, it's about motivation. When I was 17, we were at the end of the Cold War, and that was a big deal. I mean, that was huge. I mean, King of the North, I mean, that seemed to fit America and everything. And that didn't go the way society said. The King of the North was supposed to win, right? Or prevail, or whatever it was, how they put it before the end. But that didn't happen. So anyways, I see George Bush Sr., and he says, peace and security. I don't even remember what everything else was, but even as a Jehovah's Witness, I understand. What does that mean? Okay. For those who don't know, Jehovah's Witnesses have a peculiar set of what's going to happen. Predictions, prophecies, or interpretation of prophecies. They believe that the nations will declare peace and security, according to 1 Thessalonians 5:3. They're vague on exactly how that's going to be. Is it the United Nations? But they think it's a unique way of doing it. That's what they kind of say. And they say different things, but you know how it is. So I saw that, and I almost panicked because I'm not baptized and I'm not pioneering. That moment changed me. As a Jehovah's Witness, I hit the books. That moment, I became a bookworm of biblical topics. Started preparing for the meeting seriously without parents bugging you, doing this stuff, doing the research, reading the older books, getting a grasp of the history. And it was the beginning, and I was baptized within months. Pioneered the next auxiliary pioneer. You can't pioneer, I think, 6 months until after you're baptized or something like that. Pioneered the next month auxiliary. Auxiliaried while I was still in school, and regular pioneered the 1st September I got. So I was actually pioneering technically in high school. If you honestly looked at it, motivations are out of fear and trying to perform the routine of Watchtower that says you're going to survive the upcoming Armageddon. Yeah, so after that moment, I was pioneering. As soon as I left high school, boom. And it was interesting the way I pioneered. I was in a pioneer, you would understand, some of you witnesses, that had no young people. So I was pioneering, in essence, by myself. And there were only 2 older brothers. The rest were married sisters in the late 20s. And during that time period, I was out almost every single day. Didn't have much work to do. I had 3 sets of clothing. People would make fun of me in the congregation for my 3 sets of clothing. And I took it as a test, refining me, you know. And obviously at that time, you're getting parts. You're starting to do, you know, the sound system and the microphones and all these type of things. You're busy. You're putting effort into your talks. You're making them fancy, and I would put charts and do things like that. And I had a bit of a knack for speaking, so I try to make it fun. And so it's a strange thing. It has nothing to do with the Bible, nothing to do with spirituality. But if you give good talks, it's a little bonus, you might say. And so I got into that world. And I was in service almost every day for those 3 years. So we can divide my next bit into the next 3 years. Those 3 years, I was as perfect as a Jehovah's Witness as you can get. I really lived it. I talked. I threw out any music. I threw out, hockey shirts that, because it's idolatry. I just threw out my Van Halen collection. My Van Halen collection. I bought them all back. Don't worry. But I threw them out. I kept my Rush collection though, because there's nothing too bad about that my Rush collection. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Rush later, the band. Not in this interview, but what they meant to me. They meant a lot to me. I'm just going to lose it here. Getting the clip. Getting the clip. So, yeah, I lived it. Singing the melodies, to myself. Walking down the street. And I walked the walk. I prepared for the meeting. I went to the meeting. I took notes. I came back home, reviewed them. I did that for the book study. I did that for the Theocratic Ministry School Service meeting, as I used to call it. I did that for the public talks. I did it. I was there before the meeting, before and then the after. Studied and read I wanted to read every modern book. I started from the 1970s and I started reading all the old material. These books here, these were given to me. These are an old set of studies in scriptures. They were given to me and I read those. That was a little bit later though. This is probably not part of the first 3 years. It's probably my next set. But again, I was just absorbed at reading the old books, reading the Babylon the Great, the Kingdom book, all those books. I was trying to understand this very confusing doctrine. It's really a distortion of Christianity. And so during this 3 years, I became an MS, had parts at the circuit assemblies. They were asking me to do parts of the district. And the CO was giving me a invitation to Bethel, which he's basically a registered Bethel. And I like the CO. We got along well, which it often is about who you know. In fact, things got a lot more difficult for me when my stepfather had a stroke. He had a stroke at 50, a severe stroke. He was paralyzed for the rest of his life. And obviously, he was no longer able to be the PO or the Kobe, as they call him now. When you are not participating in Jehovah's Witness world, even if you had for 40, 50 years, it's a strange dichotomy of how they treat you. And I'm sure we'll go over in future videos many examples of that. I certainly felt it when I was not in those pioneering MS positions. You definitely are treated differently. And you look at people differently too. I mean, that's the culture you grow up with. You look at them differently too, even on a subconscious level. And you try not to, but it's just there. That's kind of how it is. You view people in certain ways when they have a pioneer or a special pioneer or Bethelite or any of those things. But when one is no longer, it kind of, he's 30 years as a full-time servant, yeah, but it's almost like that Janet Jackson, like, what have you done for me lately? And if you haven't done anything lately for the society, you're not getting parts. You're not considered a spiritual giant. You may even be considered spiritually weak when you're not fully participating. Even if you are in your whole soul service, that's all you can do. Other people can't see that. They can't determine that. So often that's the way you'll get viewed. So during this time, I had a couple of interesting things happen. One is a Truman Show moment. So I had an instance where my father asked me to get something for him in his office. At this time, he had a little office. So I went up, looked, rummaging through his pages, and I noticed that I picked up something, and it had like the header, you can tell. And you don't look at it as a Jehovah's Witness. You don't need someone to tell you that. But I caught it, and I'm looking for something else, and I just caught this paper at the corner of my eye, and I noticed it was confidential, elder's letter of some type. And it had to do not with child abuse, child custody. And if you recall, witnesses in the 80s, this was the big deal. And this was giving some direction. And again, I got that just from, believe it or not, just from looking at the bullet notes. So it had kind of like a bullet note of what to do and what not to do. And it said things to the gist of, don't say you can't have friends. Like, this is what to say in a child custody case, right? You went to before the court. What you were not to do, what you should do. And it said stuff like this. So, yeah, don't say you can't have friends. Don't say you can't celebrate birthdays or Christmas or Easter or Halloween. Don't say you want to pioneer. A list of that. And I stopped, because, it was like looking inside the ark. You don't want to get blinded. But I caught that, and a thought came to my mind. A thought without thinking. That's a lie. Those are lies. Those are lies. Everything you're telling the court is a lie. We are not allowed to have friends outside Jehovah's Witness community. We don't celebrate birthday, Christmas, and Halloween. We do want to pioneer when we grow up. We do want to go to Bethel. And then, of course, I started reasoning, thought-stopping techniques of a cult. Well, the end is so close. What's the only way that they're going to survive is by being a Jehovah's Witness. And so we might have to. And I reasoned this way. This cognitive dissonance. Within an instant, I reasoned that way. It wasn't like I was debating, No, that was it. We have to do it that way. And that's the way my mind at that time was thinking. But looking back, I think, wow, that was early on. Man, it would have been nice to wake up back then. So that was one Truman Show moment I wanted to share. There's a couple more later on that might bring out. First 3 years where I'm a perfect Jehovah's Witness. Driving the bus, running on all cylinders, and I am absolutely miserable. Now, I was told by Happy Miss Happerson Pioneer when I was 15, 16 years old that everything was going to be wonderful and happy. And I thought I was going to be happy too. And they told me I was going to be happy. And I figured I'd feel saved and closer to Jehovah, and he would love me more. I had, all those things, friends and all that. I didn't have friends as Jehovah's Witness. I really didn't, I was with a couple of older dudes most of the time, nice guys and all that stuff, but, they never went out past 12, and can't hang out with this. You can't, right? Or else the people will talk. And unless you're dating seriously, you're not supposed to really go out with sisters in service a lot, right? If you do it a lot, then if you go to a call or something, that's okay, or a Bible study. But if it continues in more than a casual way, you'll get talked to. So now for about 3 years, got a little bit more work, had a little more clothes that went along with that part of it. I was getting ready for the meeting. And now some time has gone by, and I am again at the lowest low. Being asked to go to Bethel and MS and giving parts at circuit assemblies and doing things on the fly. And every hall has those young kids get out of high school and start doing that stuff. I was just one of them. So now there was this one time I remember, and I was studying the big one, the big reference Bible, 84 edition. And I remember I was on the floor. I didn't have a bed. I needed more room, so I just had a mattress, and I would flip it up against the wall. And then, so I had more room. I'm sitting on the ground, and I'm going through the Romans, book of Romans. And I'm reading it. This is done many times before, but this time, as often as eureka moments, right? And so I was reading Romans. I can't remember exactly which part of Romans because it says this several times about how you are saved not by works, but by faith. And I'll never forget reading that and thinking to myself, how I wish that were true. How I wish that were true. Because that definitely was not what was going on. I had been in service hundreds of times, more than probably anyone in that congregation for those 3 years. I had studied and prayed probably more than anyone I have known, certainly through that time period. And I was miserable. Like suicidally miserable, as I would be for most of my witness life. And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, what? that's not happening to me. And I looked at the clock, and it's, digital clock, and, it was 6:45 or whatever it was. Oh, gotta go get ready. Already showered or whatever. So went, I got to my closet. I'm taking out, buttoning up my shirt. As I'm buttoning up my shirt, I just see my peripheral. I kind of saw the Bible was still opened up. And I saw it. And I just broke down. Collapsed. On the knees. Like a movie. Like it never happened to me before or since. And I didn't want to be dramatic. I was all by myself. No one was watching. I wasn't trying to put on a show. I physically lost the ability to stand in agony and in frustration and in anxiety, and just fell to my knees and sobbed. It's probably the first time I've used that word, sobbed. And looking back, kind of again in hindsight, I certainly didn't at the time. That moment changed me. Just like that motivation moment when I was 10. At this moment, I think I was 19, 20, changed me as well. Even though at the time I didn't realize it. It was almost more of a Freudian, subconscious thing. I think my subconscious was out before I was. It realized this doesn't work. This just doesn't work. Of course, I didn't think that. My frontal lobe is not thinking that way. Its reasoning, of course, is that it's all you. You are the one that's wrong. You're doing it wrong in some way. You're not doing it right. I don't know how much more I was supposed to be studying. I did everything for years. It didn't make me better. It didn't do anything. It made me worse. The cause of my disease. I was taking the cure which caused the disease. And the more the disease got worse, the cure was the actual cause. And so I got more of the cause that caused more of the disease. And you get this negative feedback loop that I'm sure lots of Jehovah's Witnesses experience. It does not work. It does not work. Not talking about the Bible. I'm not talking about Christianity. That's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about Jehovah's Witnesses' versions of these things do not work. And that moment, in hindsight, changed me forever. Till this moment, I don't think I've ever been the same. In some way, I lost my naivete at that point. I don't know. But something in me changed. Metaphorically, my soul was broken. Soon after that initial 3 years and this incident of, I don't know if you want to call it realization. It was not a realization. It was just a Truman Show moment. But, I just, went to the meeting, got your little endorphin rush. Something definitely changed at that point. I began to associate with some other brothers from different congregations. Eventually met what would be my wife, who would become my wife at that time as well. And so my focus kind of shifted. Not that I was, never wanted to not pioneer all those things, or go to Bethel. Of course, those are theocratic goals. But, it's part of life. You show an interest in the opposite sex. That's how it goes. And so interesting isn't dating a whole new dynamic in Jehovah's Witness world. It's just horrible. They take the fun out of everything. Dating isn't fun. Being engaged isn't. Certainly for me it wasn't. Maybe some people did. I doubt it, though. It's not fun. I'll have different episodes. We'll go over the dating culture of Jehovah's Witness world, which is really bizarre. But the next part of my life, my wife, to-be wife, would be in my life. And she would be the only person that I had almost regular contact with during this next 3 years. I no longer pioneered, and I was no longer an MS, and I was suffering from this whole time period something called pure OCD. Pure OCD is very difficult to describe, but it's like thoughts that come into your brain. In a religious context, are often blasphemous thoughts. And these caused me extreme anxiety. Extreme anxiety. And it started, interesting enough, almost the day I started pioneering at 17. Or at least it went to a 10. It went to a 9, 10. I was in such a pitiful condition. But now, you kind of have the MS thing and the pioneer thing, and everyone's on the wind in your sails. Dealing with it is a little easier. Now I got none of those things. Now you're over here. You're no longer viewed a certain way. You no longer view yourself. Not that you viewed yourself in any worthy way, but now you're looking at yourself even worse. And my life went to the lowest 3 years that a 22, 23, 24 should ever go. The most best parts of your life, were absolutely wasted, ruined, and suicide was. I prayed to God that I wouldn't wake up many, 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 many times. I prayed to God probably, and I'm not exaggerating, during this time period. I stopped working. So I started working a little more and then stopped working for a time period. This mental illness consumed me. I could barely do anything, and it absolutely brought me to the lowest you could be. I just thought about how to kill myself, how to do it. I had plans. I knew what subway station to go to. I had it worked out. And it was just, it's almost indescribable, the torture that it was. Torture. But perhaps we'll go more details in another time.